Nearly every passenger alive today has boarded an Airbus or Boeing jet at some point. Families packed into the narrow cabins of the 737 for holiday trips. Students flying on the A320 for their first journeys abroad. Business travelers walking upstairs into the 747's hump lounge, marveling at the space. These names became so familiar that air travel itself felt inseparable from them. But what if that certainty was about to change? Is this really the start of a new aviation order? In this video, we will uncover how the C919 could reshape the future of flying. Let's get into it. For much of modern aviation history, two companies have stood above all others: Airbus and Boeing. Their rivalry shaped the skies, their aircraft filled airports, and their influence left little room for anyone else. If you stepped onto an airplane in almost any country during the past 40 years, chances are high it was made by one of these two giants. It gets more intriguing. Stay tuned. Boeing had the early lead. Founded in the United States, it grew rapidly after World War II. Its designs, such as the 707 and later the 737, helped turn air travel from a luxury for the wealthy into something ordinary people could afford. In the 1970s, Boeing introduced the 747, known as the jumbo jet. With its double-deck design and the famous hump at the front, it became the symbol of long-haul flying. Families boarding for trips abroad often remember the thrill of climbing into such a massive aircraft. For decades, the 747 connected continents and carried millions of passengers. But Boeing was not alone. In Europe, a group of countries decided they did not want the skies ruled only by America. They joined together to form Airbus in the 1970s. At first, some people doubted whether this new company could compete. But Airbus quickly proved itself. Its A320 became a favorite for short and medium routes, while its larger models, like the A330 and the double-deck A380, pushed boundaries of comfort and technology. By the late 20th century, the stage was set. Airlines choosing new jets almost always had to pick between Airbus and Boeing. Their catalogs covered every type of flight: short domestic hops, transcontinental journeys, and ultra-long flights across oceans. Smaller manufacturers existed, but none had the global reach, the production scale, or the trust of airlines to challenge the big two. For passengers, this dominance became part of everyday life. People did not always think about the names of the companies, but they knew the aircraft. Holidaymakers crammed into the narrow rows of the 737 or the A320 for short trips. Business travelers crossed oceans on sleek A330s or sturdy 777s. Some remember the quiet awe of boarding the A380, the largest passenger jet ever built, with two full decks stretching the length of the plane. Others recall gazing out of the window of a 747, marveling at its wings as it lifted entire cities of travelers into the sky. What made Airbus and Boeing so dominant was not only their aircraft, but also the trust they had built. Airlines knew these companies could deliver planes on time, provide spare parts, and support maintenance across the globe. Governments supported them, airports were designed around them, and training schools prepared pilots specifically for their models. Competing against that kind of system seemed almost impossible. By the start of the 21st century, the duopoly looked unchallengeable. Airbus and Boeing were not just aircraft makers, they were gatekeepers of global aviation. If you wanted to fly, you had no real alternative but to fly with them. For decades, China looked at the skies and saw a gap. Its airlines were growing fast. Its people were flying more than ever. Yet almost every plane in its airports came from somewhere else. Airbus and Boeing supplied nearly the entire fleet. For a country that had become the world's factory floor, building ships, trains, and even space programs, this reliance on foreign aircraft felt like a weakness. But what they did next changes the entire story. The Chinese government began trying to change that as early as the 1970s. First came small attempts such as modifying Russian-built planes or producing short-haul aircraft for local routes. These efforts were often clumsy and rarely gained international attention. But with each attempt, China learned something new. By the early 2000s, leaders in Beijing were determined the nation would no longer be only a buyer of jets, it would become a builder. What made this effort different was the full support of the state. In China, aviation was never treated as just a business. It was seen as a matter of national pride. Billions of dollars in subsidies were poured into research, factories, and partnerships. Engineers were trained both at home and abroad. Foreign companies were asked to share technology in exchange for access to the Chinese market. Step by step, China built the foundation of its own aviation industry. Every time an airline ordered an Airbus or Boeing jet, China had to rely on Western designs, Western supply chains, and Western approvals. In an age of rising competition between countries, this dependence felt risky. By creating its own aircraft, China could cut away that reliance and prove to the world that it could stand on equal footing. Ordinary citizens also felt the weight of this ambition. In Chinese media, the project was described not just as engineering, but as a national dream. Factories rolling out new parts were celebrated on the news. Test flights were followed like sporting events. The success of a Chinese-built jet would mean more than just cheaper tickets. It would mean dignity, strength, and recognition on the world stage. And so the challenge was set to design a narrow-body aircraft, the type most airlines use for short and medium trips, and to place it directly in competition with the two bestsellers of all time, the Airbus A320 and the Boeing 737. These were the workhorses of the world, carrying billions of passengers every year. To build a rival was to aim for the very heart of global aviation. This was not a small task. Even established aircraft makers have faced delays, cost overruns, and design failures. But China pressed forward with the full weight of its government behind the project. Out of this ambition came the C919, a jet designed not just to carry passengers, but to carry the hopes of a nation. And out of this ambition came a jet designed to stand shoulder to shoulder with the A320 and the 737. When the C919 finally rolled onto the runway, it looked familiar. A long, narrow body, two engines slung neatly under the wings, and a cabin that could seat about 150 to 170 passengers. At first glance, it could have been mistaken for an Airbus A320 or a Boeing 737, and that was no accident. China's designers chose this shape for a reason. Narrow-body aircraft are the backbone of global aviation. They carry the majority of travelers, linking cities within countries and connecting shorter international routes. By stepping into this space, China was not chasing a niche. It was going straight to the core of the market. The C919 promised modern features from the very start. Instead of older engines, it was fitted with advanced, fuel-efficient ones. These engines were quieter, cleaner, and designed to save airlines millions over time. Fuel costs are the single biggest expense for airlines, and every percentage point of savings can mean survival in a tough market. On paper, the C919 offered exactly what carriers were looking for. But it gets even better. Inside the cabin, the promises continued. The seats were arranged in the standard 3 on each side, but the designers emphasized comfort. Larger overhead bins, improved lighting, and quieter interiors were highlighted. Passengers would not feel like they were stepping onto an experimental aircraft. Instead, they would walk into a cabin that felt just as polished and familiar as the jets they had flown before. This was deliberate. Airlines and travelers tend to trust what they know. A plane that looked and felt too different might raise questions, but a plane that delivered comfort in familiar ways could more easily gain acceptance. In many ways, the C919's greatest strength was this balance between the new and the recognizable. The comparison with Western rivals was unavoidable. Airbus had its A320neo, praised for efficiency and range. Boeing had the 737 MAX, designed to be competitive despite its troubled early history. The C919 was positioned as a direct challenger to both. It promised similar seating, similar performance, and the same ability to fly the most common routes profitably. For airlines, it was meant to be a new option in a space long ruled by just two companies. Supporters of the jet pointed to its potential advantages. A domestic Chinese plane could be cheaper for Chinese airlines to buy, easier to maintain locally, and supported by government incentives. In a country where air travel demand was booming, this meant thousands of possible orders. Outside China, the jet's appeal was framed around lower purchase costs and the chance to diversify away from Airbus and Boeing. But ambition and promise are not the same as trust. Building an aircraft is one challenge. Convincing pilots, passengers, and regulators to believe in it is another. Safety records take years to build. Airlines want proof, not just projections. Passengers want confidence that every bolt, every system, and every test has been verified to the highest standard. The C919 carried with it glossy brochures, technical charts, and proud announcements. It also carried a question that could not yet be answered. Would airlines beyond China be willing to put their faith in it? Would passengers step aboard without hesitation? The jet promised efficiency, comfort, and competition, but the deeper story was suspenseful because the real test was not in its first flight, but in whether those promises could translate into trust. In the end, only time will reveal if the C919 can truly deliver. Before we move forward, let me ask you something. Have you ever flown on an Airbus A320 or a Boeing 737? For many people, these planes carried them on family holidays, student trips, or even their very first flight. They became part of our memories without us even realizing it. Now imagine being seated on China's new C919, a jet designed to take the same role. Would you feel the same sense of trust and comfort? Take a moment to think about your own flight experiences, and when you're done watching, share them in the comments. I'd love to know your story. Promises are one thing. Getting an aircraft into regular service around the world is another. The C919 faces several real hurdles, practical, regulatory, and political, that will take time and work to overcome. Curious? Brace yourself. It's about to be a bumpy ride. First, there is certification. That is the formal approval from safety authorities that a plane is safe to fly. In China, national regulators can approve an aircraft. But for global airlines to buy and fly it widely, approval is usually needed from major foreign regulators too, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency and the United States Federal Aviation Administration. These agencies check designs, test results, manufacturing records, and maintenance plans. They often ask for independent data and on-site inspections. Getting those approvals means long, detailed reviews. It is not a quick rubber stamp. Second, reliability and production scale matter. Making one prototype is very different from building hundreds or thousands on time with the same quality every time. Aircraft manufacture relies on a wide network of suppliers, engines, avionics, landing gear, and more. Each supplier must meet strict standards. If any part is late or fails quality checks, the whole production line slows. Airlines want a steady supply of planes and a steady supply of spare parts. They also want a global maintenance network, so a plane can be repaired wherever it flies. Building that network takes years and many investments. Frustrating much, but there's more. Third, there is the question of passenger and airline trust. Safety is the first concern for people when they fly. For decades, airlines and passengers built trust in familiar names. A new maker must prove itself in day-to-day operations. Leasing companies and insurers, who often buy planes for airlines, will also be cautious until they see a solid safety and reliability record. For many passengers, stepping aboard an unfamiliar jet raises a simple thought. Will it be as safe and comfortable as what I know? Answers to that come slowly through hundreds of flights without incident. Fourth, geopolitics makes this harder. Aircraft depend on global trade. Engines, electronic parts, and software often cross borders many times before assembly. When relations between countries are tense, export controls or limits on technology sharing can affect who can supply what. Political pressures may make some airlines or countries hesitant to adopt a jet tied closely to one nation's strategic plans. None of these problems is necessarily fatal, but they are real and they are practical. Certification takes paperwork and time. Scaling production needs suppliers and training. Building trust requires spotless operations and years of service. And geopolitics can add uncertainty that no airline wants on day one. In short, the C919's path is not only a technical test, it is a long, careful process of convincing regulators, suppliers, airlines, and passengers that it is ready for the world. The C919 is not just a concept on paper anymore. It already has customers, and that fact alone sets it apart from many past attempts at breaking into the commercial aircraft market. The largest buyers, unsurprisingly, are China's own airlines. Major carriers such as China Eastern have placed orders, and many regional airlines have followed. These commitments mean that, from the start, the jet will not struggle to find operators. The demand within China's fast-growing domestic travel market provides a strong base that ensures the aircraft will not sit idle, and it still gets better. What makes this more interesting is the potential reach beyond China's borders. Airlines in developing regions, where price sensitivity is high, may look at the C919 as a serious alternative. Aircraft are enormous investments, and carriers often weigh every dollar before committing to a purchase. If the C919 can deliver at a lower price than its Western rivals, while still offering modern features and competitive performance, it instantly becomes attractive to buyers outside the usual Airbus and Boeing orbit. The pricing factor cannot be overstated. For airlines, a new jet is not only about fuel efficiency or passenger comfort. It is about whether the numbers make sense over 20 or 30 years of service. A lower sticker price, paired with reduced operating costs, can tilt the scales in favor of a newcomer. If China can keep the C919 competitively priced while ramping up support networks worldwide, it may open doors that once seemed firmly shut. There is also a historical lesson to keep in mind. When Airbus first entered the market in the 1970s, many doubted whether it could ever stand against Boeing. It was seen as an experiment, an alliance of European countries with no guarantee of lasting power. Yet, over time, Airbus not only survived but thrived. It introduced designs that reshaped the industry and eventually secured its place as Boeing's equal. What once seemed impossible became ordinary, a two-player market that defined aviation for decades. This is where the C919 story gains weight. For the first time in modern commercial aviation, the idea of a true three-way competition feels within reach. If China succeeds, the landscape shifts from a stable duopoly to a more dynamic balance, where three companies set prices, push designs, and chase airline orders. That change does not just matter to executives in boardrooms, it filters down to passengers, airports, and even ticket prices. For decades, travelers boarding flights around the world had only two choices. They might have been sitting in a Boeing or an Airbus, but the difference hardly mattered. The names were the same. The C919 promises to break that cycle. It represents not just another airplane, but the possibility of choice, where none existed before. And if that choice takes hold, it changes everything. So could the C919 really end Airbus and Boeing's reign? Technically, it is too early to say. The jet still has hurdles to clear: global certification, production scale, and the test of long-term reliability. But emotionally, the answer feels different. Because the C919 is not just another aircraft, it is China's declaration that the skies will no longer belong to only two names. For passengers, that means something bigger than engines or wings. It means a third choice, a new chapter, and the possibility of a more competitive market that touches ticket prices, comfort, and the way we all travel. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Would you fly on the C919 if it came to your city? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories from aviation's front lines.